Hello. In this video, we are going to see how we can trigger an animation when an element shows up in the viewport using just few lines of JavaScript and Anime.JS. I'm going to demonstrate a very simple example for education purposes, but you can make any kind of animation according to that. You will find everything I use linked in the description and the code on GitHub. If you want to skip to the JavaScript part, there are timestamps below. So after creating our HTML markup with exclamation mark and tab, we create some divs and we name them from section 1 to 5. Then we link the CSS and the JavaScript file in the head. Then we add some text so we can see them in our browser. Let's now style them to be 50% of the viewport's height and set the font size to 60 pixels. Let's also add a border so we can see them better. I'm gonna set the background of each div with a different color. This is how it looks. Now I'm going to create another div inside of section 3. This is the one we are going to animate. I'll just write animate me and set the class to text animate. Let's set its color to white. So before we start animating, we need to go to cdnjs.com and look for AnimeJS. You can find the link in the description. This is the library we are going to use, and to keep the video short and simple, I am just going to copy and paste the minified version script tag and paste it in our HTML file. Now, the JavaScript part. I'm using AnimeJS function and store it in a variable which I'm going to name animation. This function takes an object as an argument, and the first property is called targets. And here we basically set which element we are going to animate. So I am going to copy the class name of this animate me text animate, and paste it here. Then I am going to translate it in the x-axis, basically move it left or right by 800 pixels, and set the duration to 4000 milliseconds, which means 4 seconds. Let's see what happens. Okay, it works. The anime function is responsible for the animation, and many more interesting stuff you can find in the AnimeJS documentation linked in the description. So this is our animation code. Let's now see how we can trigger that animation when we scroll to a specific element. Here in the documentation we see this very interesting seek function, and this progress bar could be the scroll bar. They also suggest to use it that way, and they provide a function to do that. So we are going to modify this function a little bit to fit our needs. We don't need this seek progress L, and we don't need onInput. Instead of seek progress L, we want window, and instead of onInput, we want onScroll. Now, inside the function, we paste what they suggest for scroll. But we need to define this scrollPercent. Basically, where the viewport is as we scroll. I'm going to comment this out for a bit. And I am going to console.log window.pageyOffset. Let's open our console and see what we get. So as we scroll, this number changes. It basically shows us how far we are from the top. You can see that up here at the top the value is 0. So let's say we want to start our animation when we hit section 2. To do that, we should know its position. So let's select this element and store it in a variable. I'm going to name it section 2. So document.querySelector, the class we want, this one here, section 2, and paste it here. Now again, in our console, let's see the value of section2.offsetTop. Basically, this property tells us how far this element is from the top. I'm commenting this out so we don't get confused. And let's see. This is 307. It doesn't change, so section 2 is 307 pixels far from the top. So the scroll percentage we are looking for is the subtraction of the window offset from the div's top position. Let's see that a bit more clear by logging into the console. So now we get a negative number, and as we get closer to section 2, the value comes closer to 0. Let's take a closer look. Let's get rid of this. And now we can finally activate this AnimeSeek function. Now back to our browser, we notice that the animation starts by itself even if we don't scroll at all. This happens because in the anime function up here, we have to set the autoplay property to false. Let's refresh and see what happens. And now we see that the animation didn't start, and as soon as we hit section 2, our animation starts. Quite fast though, but it works as expected. So if we increase this value here, we can affect the speed of the animation. The frames of the animation are spread along this scroll distance. At least this is the way I understand it, and feel free to share your opinion in the comments. So now we notice a slower animation. 5 times slower, to be precise. The value is up to you. Let's try 5000. Let's check it out. Much slower with this value. So let's call this one speed and store it in a variable to keep our code clean. Let's say 100. Still works. Now let's say we want to start the animation a little bit earlier or a little bit later. Instead of triggering when we hit section 2, it could start here, for example. All we need to do is modify the scroll percentage value by an offset. Let's create this offset variable here and give it a value of 300. So I'm going to add offset to this one, and if you choose to subtract it, it is still correct. You just have to set the offset value accordingly. And as we refresh, let's see what happens. Our animation starts up here, 300 pixels above section 2. Let's try that with 100. So now it starts a bit lower. Nice that we got even more control of our scroll animation. So I'm going to delete all of this and write a clean, reusable function. I'm going to name it AnimeJS, and it's going to take 3 arguments. The first is the div we want to set as trigger for the animation to start. The second is the speed of the animation as we scroll, and I'm going to set the default value to 100. And the third one is the offset, which I'm also going to set to 0 as a default value in case we don't want to use it. Inside the function, we set the scroll percent, which is window.pageYOffset minus our div's offset top, which doesn't have to be a div, but it's pretty common. And then we return scroll percent plus offset, and all of this, wrapped in a parenthesis, divided by speed. Let's use it in our listener. So now we have window.onScroll, and inside the function, the AnimeJS library seek function. We actually modified it a bit to fit our scrolling needs. So animation seek, animate on scroll instead of scroll percentage. And let's run it for section 2 for the sake of our example. multiplied with animation.duration. And here it is. Let's run it one more time, but this time we're going to set a speed and an offset value. And that's it. I actually made this video because I couldn't find anything on YouTube, Stack Overflow, etc. Feel free to suggest improvements in the comments. If you find that video useful, like it and subscribe to the channel.